It's late. Everyone else is asleep, but you're still awake, aren't you? Good, because what I'm about to tell you is not for the sleeping. Welcome to Sleepless Horror. In 2013, Carolyn Perron sat down for an interview about the film that had just been made about her family. She had cooperated with the production. She had given them the case files. She had told them everything. And when the journalist asked what she thought of the final film, she paused for a long time. Then she said, "They got the facts right, but they got the feeling wrong." It was worse, she said. It was always worse. This is what the film didn't show you. January 18th, 1971. Roger and Carolyn Perron, along with their 5 daughters, moved into a 14-room farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The house was built in 1736. According to historical records, 8 generations of the same family had lived and died within those walls. The asking price was well below market value. No one told them why. The previous owner, an elderly man named Norris Arnold, had one piece of advice before he handed over the keys. Just one. For the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night. Roger Perron reportedly laughed. He thought the old man was eccentric. He was wrong. According to Carolyn Perron's own account, documented across 3 books she wrote about the experience, it started on the very first night. Not with anything dramatic, with a smell, a cold, sweet, rotting smell that moved through the house like it was breathing, in and out. Carolyn described it as the smell of something that had been dead for a long time but hadn't yet accepted it. She opened all the windows. By morning, the smell was gone. She told herself it was the pipes. Old house, old pipes, nothing more. Then the second night, the smell came back, in a different room. Within the first week, something began happening in the kitchen. Every morning, without fail, Carolyn would come downstairs to find the broom standing in the center of the floor, not leaning against a wall, not fallen over, standing, upright, in the center. She moved it back to the corner every time. It always came back. She assumed the children were doing it. She asked them. They denied it. She set up a system. She began leaving the broom in different positions each night, behind the door, in the closet, in the pantry, every single morning, center of the floor. The children were not doing it. Then came the clock. According to Carolyn's written account, she began waking up every night at the same time, 3:17 a.m. Not 3 o'clock, not 3:30, 3:17, every single night. No alarm, no sound, no reason, just awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, with the feeling she described in her own words as the absolute certainty that I was not alone in that room. She began tracking the time in a journal, 22 nights in a row, 3:17 a.m., every time. On the 23rd night, she didn't wake up at 3:17. She woke up at 3:16 and heard footsteps on the stairs, slow ones, coming up. By spring of 1971, it was no longer just Carolyn. All 5 daughters were reporting things. The youngest, April, who was 5 years old, had developed what the family described as an imaginary friend. She called him Manny. She spoke to him daily. She set a place for him at the table. She laughed at things only she could hear. Carolyn assumed it was the imagination of a young child, until one morning, April came downstairs and told her mother something. She said, "Manny says you need to leave. He says if you don't leave, you won't be able to." Carolyn Perron stood in that kitchen and felt, according to her account, like the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees in an instant. She told April that Manny was not real. April looked at her for a long moment, then said, "He's standing right next to you, Mommy." By summer of 1971, accounts from the Perron family described the activity escalating beyond isolated incidents. Objects were reported found moved between rooms overnight. Doors were found open that had been locked. The oldest daughter, Andrea, reported waking to find a woman standing at the foot of her bed, dressed in gray, watching her sleep. When she turned on the light, the room was empty, but there was something on the floor, a wet footprint, one footprint, in the center of the room, facing the bed. Roger Perron was a practical man. He checked the plumbing, he checked the roof, he checked every possible rational explanation. None of them fit. In the fall of 1971, Carolyn Perron made a decision that would change everything. She reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed and Lorraine Warren were by 1971 among the most documented paranormal investigators in America. They had been called to cases across the country. They had worked with law enforcement, clergy, and academics. They did not take cases lightly. According to documented accounts, when Ed Warren first walked into the Perron farmhouse, he stopped in the hallway. He stood there for a long moment, then turned to his wife. According to Lorraine Warren's account, he said simply, "This is not a normal case." The investigation that followed would last for years, not weeks, not months, years. Over 200 individual incidents were reportedly documented over the course of the Warren investigation. The film showed you 15. According to accounts from both the Warren files and Carolyn Perron's own testimony, the investigation uncovered a history of the house that the family had never been told. Historical records, according to researchers who worked the case, indicated that the land the farmhouse was built on had a documented history of violent deaths spanning multiple generations. At least 8 members of the family who had previously owned the property had died under what records described as unusual circumstances. 2 suicides, 1 drowning in 2 inches of water, 1 child found in the barn, and 1 woman, the one the Warrens would come to identify as the primary presence in the house, who, according to historical records, had practiced what court documents of the era described as witchcraft. Her name, according to those records, was Bathsheba. She had died in 1885. According to Carolyn Perron, she never left. The Conjuring depicts a single dramatic seance scene, but according to documented accounts, the sessions that took place in that house were far more disturbing and far more numerous than any single scene could convey. Lorraine Warren, in interviews given years after the investigation, described moments during those sessions that she said she had never spoken about publicly. She described Carolyn Perron entering what witnesses described as a trance-like state, speaking in a voice that was not her own, in a language investigators could not identify, for extended periods of time. Roger Perron, according to accounts from his daughters, eventually asked the Warrens to stop. He believed the investigations were making things worse, not better. The Warrens disagreed, and that disagreement would drive a permanent fracture through the Perron family. According to Andrea Perron, the oldest daughter, in interviews she gave decades after leaving the house, the film showed a family that was afraid, but what the film couldn't show is what 10 years of that fear does to people, what it does to a marriage, what it does to children who grow up believing that something in their home wants them gone. Andrea Perron has said in interviews, "We didn't just experience paranormal events, we experienced a slow erosion of everything normal, of safety, of sleep, of the feeling that home is supposed to be the one place where you are protected." The house took that from them for 10 years, and they couldn't leave, not because they were trapped, but because Roger Perron had put every dollar the family had into that house. They had nowhere to go. So they stayed, and every morning Carolyn came downstairs and moved the broom back to the corner. The Perron family left the farmhouse in 1980, 9 years after moving in. According to Andrea Perron, the day they finally left, her mother stood in the doorway of the house for a long time, looking back in. Andrea asked her what she was doing. She said she was saying goodbye. Andrea wrote in her account of that day, "I asked her, goodbye to what? She looked at me and said, to the parts of myself I'm leaving behind." They drove away. Andrea says her mother cried the entire way, not from sadness, from relief. The farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island still stands today. It is privately owned. The current owners have given interviews. They report nothing unusual. Carolyn Perron passed away in 2021. In her final public interview, she was asked if she believed what happened in that house was real. She answered without hesitation, "It was the most real thing that ever happened to me." She was asked if she ever thought about going back. Another long pause, then, "Every single day. And every single day, I choose not to."
That's the real story behind The Conjuring, not the version Hollywood gave you, the version the family lived. Carolyn Perron spent the last years of her life making sure people knew the difference. If you made it to the end of this, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe to Sleepless Horror. Every Friday, a new case. Every Friday, something they don't want you to know. And if tonight you find yourself waking up at the same time, just remember, it's probably nothing. Probably. Sleep if you can.